I'm glad that I was, able to talk about it the way I have been, because it is a challenge, because there is that voice that's saying, what, are you soft?
Hi, and welcome to the Living Richly podcast. My name is Rob Dale. I am here with my great friends Eric Deschamps and Trevor Munven. And who the fuck are you?
Hey! Am I the first guest?
You are.
Yes!
Yes! It's Steve.
It's Steve, folks. He's a real person.
It is so awesome to have Steve, who is our producer and from day one has been behind the cameras. We convinced him to come out from behind the cameras, in front of the cameras. It's his first time ever doing any kind of media.
Yes, he's very nervous.
And he's uncertain.
No, it's not.
No, it's not. I feel like I've known you, much of my adult life. Steve, of course, for many, many years was a host on sports talk radio, as well as other radio channels and TV, and so much of that within the Ottawa area. And I can remember listening to you, again, probably right back from 2001, thereabouts, being able to listening to you and all of the talk and takes on the Senators and Rough Riders, or whatever they would have been called at that point. I think Rough Riders
and Renegades, all of them,
all of the different, and so.
And you're in public school at this stage, right?
Yeah, exactly. I'm just a child. And am I the oldest at the table still? No,
Always the oldest.
I don't think so.
Always the oldest.
I don't know. Is there any dirt on the table? Because it would be slightly older than you.
But it is interesting when you kind of you spend a lot of years listening to someone, and literally, during the early days of sports radio here in Ottawa, listening to you every day. Certainly, you had a gift on the radio of kind of bringing people into your life in the way that you would want. And I felt like I got to know you. I got to know even some of your story as you would share about different causes and different things that matter to you. You'd get to know. And so I remember when we were talking about doing a podcast, I knew I'd been following you on Twitter for a number of years. At that point, I don't think you followed me.
TSN, Steve.
Yeah.
So
TSN.
Rob, you this seems to be a pattern for you where like you follow other. It's almost like, I don't know, stalker. There's a word called. I think he was stalking you, Steve. Yeah.
So when Rob suggests, oh, I know a guy, like we should get this guy. He talked about you like he knew you,
right?
And then we only find out later it's like, no, he's just been stalking you. He's just committed to you.
He's very committed,
more than you're committed to him.
Yeah. And for some.
Really into you.
And for some of you who have been on this journey with us and listening to these episodes, maybe you're stalking us. No, it is great to have you, but I don't know where
we call them followers.
We call them followers.
So the social media standard is followers, not stalkers.
I got to get that right.
Rob's struggling.
This really is, for me, it's been such a pleasure to get to know you through this working relationship and to really see in many ways you have aligned. There has been an authenticity. The person I've gotten to know now is the same as the person that I listen to on the radio. And so that shows me that you have been genuine in who you are during those years that you were on radio. But it is great to have you.
That would have been really awkward.
It would have been awkward.
Hey, now that I know you, you're nothing like what I see in the media.
Unlike the two of you.
Right? I'm excited to have you on the show, Steve, because, again, most folks from the beginning were into, I don't know, episode number what now, but we're really deep in now. And you've been such a huge source of mentoring and knowledge and support and understanding the industry. I mean, we couldn't have done this without you. And so to have the fourth member of the team that's usually behind the camera, to have you on the show is really special for us.
Oh, thanks. And it's right back at you guys, because obviously I've been on the other side of the camera the whole time. So it's kind of neat to sit and watch you guys beat up on Rob from this chair. So that's right.
That's a nice perspective from this side.
Yeah, but it's been great though, because right away I could see a chemistry there. Sometimes you'll take on a job and it's clearly just work, But, and this is part of why you're having me on today, because it's great conversations away from the podcast. We're enjoying a nice bourbon between shows. And so I could sense there's a good chemistry there, and it's been a good fit. And so I'm really pleased that you guys have brought me on for this. So it's been a lot of fun.
Great to have you here.
So we have our kind of sense of who you are, and for those of that may be familiar, and I've often, when I'm talking about the podcast and sharing with people that we're doing it, and I'll mention, we have TSN Steve, who is his company is the one that is producing it. They immediately know, Steve Warne, I know who that is. So people have kind of their idea of who you are, but maybe just let's start out by, for people to really know you, what do they need to know about you?
Local all the time in terms of, obviously we're on the internet now, so it doesn't really matter local or not, but I grew up just outside of Ottawa in Richmond, was a sports nut, which led to a career in sports radio. And that lasted for the better part of 30 years. And Bell Media restructuring came a calling, as it has for a lot of Canadians. And then I had to reinvent myself. And so because I have a young family, and I could pick up and go somewhere else, start anew. But I said to myself, you know what? We've moved around quite a bit to get to this stage. Ottawa's our home. This is where our friends and family are. And so we decided, okay, we're going to put down roots here for good and see what we can, the skills that I've garnered over the years, put that to work in writing for Faces magazine. I'm working communications for the city of Ottawa, and as you mentioned, a podcast company, which is why I'm here. It's capitalpodcast.ca, and so it's probably busier than I want to be at this stage in my life. I was kind of counting on kind of cruising to the finish line and hit retirement that way. But honestly, I got to say that everything's been really. It's been a neat, fresh chapter that I think was long overdue. Doing the same thing, going into the same radio studio every single day, 4 a.m. wake-up call. There was a real repetitious pattern that was setting in, and this has sort of freshened things up at a good time in my life. So it's there's been some good, there's been some bad to it.
And again, the reason for having you on an episode is not just because you're behind the camera. You have, through those, as you mentioned, the conversations that we've had between episodes, where we've learned a little of your story. You've talked about how listening to us talk, how that's impacted you. We're going to get to all that. We're going to talk about that. Maybe just from I'm going to throw kind of not listed in our notes as a question, but I'd be curious. You'd have spent a lot of time in media, on the radio, doing this. What's been one of the more interesting individuals that you've interviewed over the years? What has been?
Is it us?
Well, why is it you like me more than these two guys.
You
switch chairs.
You've talked to a lot of sports individuals, but not just sport. You've talked to a lot of politicians. You've talked to a lot of celebrities, all kinds of different individuals. Has there been one or two that have stood out for you?
Well, and based on celebrity and the moment that was, I would say Wayne Gretzky, after Canada broke a 50-year drought at the Winter Olympics in hockey. He had been the GM of that team, and we got an opportunity while the Canadians were on the ice celebrating in Salt Lake City. Gretzky's the GM. He's down at the bench and he's on the phone. We all see him on the TV, and we just happened to be doing a broadcast that day. We didn't want to. It was a Sunday afternoon. Right. But Gretzky's on his cell phone calling someone. Like, who would he be calling at this stage when he should be going bonkers with everybody else? Well, my co-host Jim Jerome, really tight with Wayne Gretzky, and so he gave us 45 minutes of his time. Wow. Right after they had won the gold medal in hockey. Wow. So that would go down as certainly one of the bigger interviews that I've done over the years. But as far as hockey goes, pretty much everybody. I remember the day Connor McDavid came on the radio about a month before draft time, and the Sens were kind of scuffling at that point. And he actually gave us the quote, "Playing for Ottawa would be a dream come true."
That.
You remember that?
Yeah.
And so, there's a lot. When it comes to sports, pretty much everybody I've had a chance to sit down and chat with. And, Pete Rose, for example, is another one. And he was a colorful character. Right. He was a say anything kind of guy, and probably not things you should be saying in public here in 2023. So, those would be a few that popped to mind immediately.
It must have been incredible to be in that kind of a world. And to your point, yes, it was 4:30 a.m. calls and kind of the routine of that. Suddenly that's gone away. And what was that like for you, even in those early days of moving out of, again, and I listen, we're talking local celebrity for sure, but local
D-level.
celebrity. Well, I don't know about that. I think certainly locally, certainly among the, I mean, I guess the demographic would primarily be the male. Tigor was the show and the people, right? And of course, Jim had left long before you had, but there was still this sense of you were a well-known individual one day, and then and you don't even get to, a lot of us leave jobs or leave careers, and we do so very privately. You're a public figure. What was that like?
Well, I mean, it's the only layoff I've known, so I can't really compare it to, anybody who has a job where it's, maybe not with that profile, I guess. But I will say that it was different. It was weird. It was, it's funny how many bullets that I ducked as far as Bell Media layoffs went over the previous 15, 20 years. I watched a lot of people, good people, both young and old, get asked to go away. And so I knew that my day would come, but still you're not ready for it. Not fully, mentally. So when the news came, it is interesting because, and I fired out a tweet as soon as it happened, and I took the high road. I said, thanks to Bell Media, I had a great run and very excited to see what the next chapter holds. And at that stage, the Ottawa Senators they'd been giving away all their players. You'll remember Eric Carlson and everybody, and a bunch of others, Mark Stone. And I said, another free agent, here in 2019. And so when I put that out there, it was like nothing I'd seen before in that, I don't know, probably about 50,000 people responded on Twitter to say what, and to express how upset they were. And they're never listening to the station again. Of course, that's
until next week.
Exactly. But it still was, I think about the people that don't have a platform like that kind of, their identity has been taken from them to some degree, and they've been laid off, and they're driving home, and it's like, what am I going to do now? I would say there was a positive that went with that from the perspective of, I had all these people, thousands of people, patting me on the back saying, you did an amazing job, I'm going to miss you. And that really helped.
Right. Interesting that you say that. And we talk about it again around language matters, the kind of people you surround yourself with, right? You could rally around there, again, two camps, maybe three, but two camps that I'm thinking of. One, which is the negative, you're the victim, let's, boycott TSN, boycott whatever. And then the other group saying, hey, we're here for you. We believe in you. And it's the positive communication versus the negative, right? Which is something we see certainly as part of the Living Richly message as the community that you're in.
Right. Well, I think it's easy to play to someone's anger, frustration, disappointment. I think we've all been in moments of great disappointment where things have not turned out the way we want. And it's not the voices that encourage victim mentality that usually stay with us. It's the messages from those folks who say, you've got this, we're with you, you're going to figure this out. That's powerful, right? The other, easy to play into that because our lower human nature is hurt. We're disappointed. I can only imagine the litany of feelings you were going through that. It was so easy to give in to that lower nature. What was that all like for you?
Well, there's truth in what you say, but at the same time, maybe you and I have brains that work differently, because I always glom onto that negative guy who came in and said, I hate your takes. I hate you. Why are you in radio? And they didn't come along very often, but I'd get 100 great messages just in general, not after the layoff, but just in general. And that one would just, and I'd want to respond and all that.
Yeah. Well, that you and I are the same.
Yeah. So, but as far as the day that it happened, it was nothing but positive. So I didn't even have to deal with the negatives. And there was even some turkeys in there that I'd quarreled with before, either on the air or in social media. And even they were rolling in with positives. So that makes things a lot easier. And if there's a downside to the profile of the job, it would be that everybody knows. Right. Everybody in my circle of friends and family and sometimes you lose a job. One of the upsides is you can go home, regroup, and maybe get a job in a month or so, and nobody even notices that anything happened.
Right. Yeah.
You're living in a fishbowl, right?
Next time you see them, you're like, "Hey, how's it going?" "Oh, I've changed. I made a change of direction or whatever." For you, everybody's like, "Oh,
yeah." Literally, there's a buddy of mine who plays pickup hockey with me, and about I took a couple of days and laid low. And maybe enjoyed a couple of those. But then went back to pickup hockey. And the first thing one of my buddies says when I come into the room, he said, "Hey, didn't you used to be Steve Warne?" So just right away.
I still am. The same guy. I'm still here.
Anyway, but you know what? The laugh we had.
No tiptoeing.
No, the laugh was great. And he knew that I would take it that way.
Yeah.
He knew I wouldn't, break down on the spot like, "How dare you?" So it was a positive, but it was just general big picture. It was an interesting experiment in that everybody that they were reaching out and stuff. It was just part of me wanted to just kind of go off and do things quietly, but everybody knew, and that's how it was.
Right.
And yet there was certainly during that season, and I'm starting to feel like I'm Barbara Walters here, and there's more to this story.
You're going to try and make me cry. That's what Barbara Walters deal was, right?
Yeah, no, I don't know, but because
it's just so weird to have you say that. That was the weirdest thing ever.
You know what? You two don't get it. Steve totally got it. Yeah. He understood exactly.
Well, no,
what
I
was saying.
get it.
Yeah.
It's just weird for you to say.
It's not.
She's still alive.
No,
she's not.
No, she recently passed.
Channeling.
She recently passed. So I am absolutely. No, of course that all happened. When did that happen? What was the year?
2019.
Right.
Okay. So 2019, that happens, very public. And then all of a sudden, the pandemic hits, lots go on. There's kind of, now you're not in the public eye, but you're still, you go out. I'm sure this still happens to this day. You go into certain environments and people go, I know who you are. And I know that you're on the radio, but still there was enough. Your face was around enough that people, I'm sure people recognize you. A lot of stuff was happening in your life privately.
Oh yeah, I mean it was an interesting run for sure, and this is I think maybe part of why we were having this conversation, and that we talked about this off the air, and in my reaction to one of the earlier episodes about just the conversation, how important that is to getting over things in your life, and in my case, it was an interesting little medley of 2019 job loss in the midst of the pandemic, and not that long after I lost my dad. Who I've known all my life. A little dark humor there.
Well played.
I was born at a very young age.
Yes.
Right. That's right.
Precisely.
Yeah.
No, I loved him dearly, and it really.
Were you guys close?
Oh yeah, yeah. We looked the same. We were the same. I wanted to be him. I wanted to act like him, and he's the reason I'm a sports fan. That was what we did. We watched sports, Hockey Night in Canada. Our deal growing up in Richmond, it was going to the local junior B game from when I was a very young age, and then the two of us sprinting home to watch the last period of Hockey Night in Canada. We'd watch NFL together. We'd chuck the football in the backyard, the whole Field of Dreams, want to have a catch, Dad. And so when he passed away, he'd been battling nothing life-threatening, but his health was going downhill. So I knew, and he was 80 when he passed. So I had a lot of time to get ready for, and we weren't the types of guys who would say I love you to each other. We always did a thing. We agreed when I was about 16, firm handshake. We'd say firm handshake, give a firm handshake, and we established that meant we loved each other. And we didn't say I love you
that.
Through our whole lives, except for firm handshake, with the exception of the last time I saw him at the hospital and actually said the words.
Yeah.
So that was a lot to deal with in a fairly short period of time, and also amidst the spectrum of dealing with a son who has autism. Adult son at home named Michael, who is an absolutely amazing human being, but has his challenges. Autism always does. Yeah. And so just all of that was a lot for a short period of time.
I remember the first time that I heard you talk about your son on the radio. I believe it was either a charity that you were involved in, but and it resonated. It's when the moment you became my favorite radio personality, and I genuinely mean that. I don't, not just because you're here. You were my favorite radio personality when you were on the air. but the connection came because of the autism. I had an aunt who committed suicide. I don't get into too much detail on her story and when I share mine, but just that she was a number of those deaths, the deaths that I had in the Dale family. And she had been, she was a teacher for a class of autistic children. And I would come in and I would do some volunteer work with her. And I got to spend a lot of time around about a dozen autistic children. And so I've always had this kind of connection with children of autistic children. And so then when I first heard that you had an autistic child, I was like, right, that made that all of a sudden there was a likeness, a connection. So I remember hearing that. But the challenges that, again, you love your son deeply, you care deeply for him, just working through that with everything else going on and being able to help support him in all of these things as well.
Yeah, that was another layer to things. Had it happened in the mid '90s, for example, when he was diagnosed, if he had gotten diagnosed in and around that time, that would have been, because obviously I had many years to get used to the idea of it. But in the mid '90s, when he was diagnosed, there was a period where you're kind of grieving the loss of the child you thought you were going to have, for lack of a better way of putting it.
Actually, that's beautifully put. Yeah.
But it's just there's a lovely, sorry to get off topic, there's a lovely sort of a poem that compares having a child with high needs, compares it to taking a vacation. You think you're going to Italy and the plane gets rerouted to Holland. And it's lovely in terms of getting your head around it, because, it's different. You're always going to wonder, why didn't I get to go to Italy like all my friends did? But I got to go to this other wonderful place as well. And Michael is a wonderful, wonderful kid. So I've got rerouted. Can you give me your original question again? Sorry about that.
Well, just again, what it would have been, and you've answered it. I don't think you went off topic at all there. I think that was actually a beautiful answer to the notion of just what it would have been like. You're supporting your son who you love, and then also going through all these other things, and he's not able to, regardless of his age, is not able to really fully comprehend and say, "Hey, Dad," he's not able to respond to you. Let's say in the same interaction of the relationship you had with your dad. You're carrying and bringing him through that whole process, even in the midst of that, which would have been incredible. Yeah,
he loved his granddad and didn't quite understand what was shaking. He understood, he's not going to be around anymore, but, death is such an abstract thing for all of us, let alone someone with autism. And so his deal was, so we're not going to Grandpa's anymore. We're not going to watch my favorite Donald Duck 1940 VHS tape that Grandpa always used to show me.
Right.
And so, I think it affected him more than we know. He doesn't articulate very well his own feelings, but I think he's absorbing way more than we know. It just doesn't. The output isn't the same as a neurotypical person. So, it was a difficult time for him, and he had his normal challenges. From my wife Linda and I's perspective, we had to deal with autism as we always have, and in my case anyway. And my wife is an absolute rock. Through all these challenges, she's been phenomenal. She's the way you guys talk about your partners. I got to say that's exactly the way it is with Linda. And since day one, she's been the reason I've accomplished anything in this life.
That's beautiful. You talk about with the pandemic, which hit everybody in lots of different ways, loss of your dad, the loss of your job, so all of us go through these things in life where life just throws shit at us, right? And we kind of go,
often comes in twos and threes.
Yeah, it's fascinating that way. And we've got to navigate our way through that. How did you go through it? What did you do to sustain yourself, to support or comfort yourself through it? Because you did say there's a lot of loss in there. There's a lot of loss, and loss unattended, becomes its own issue on top of all that. Like, how did you navigate your way through that? So, and maybe thinking of others as well, going, all right, and that's, I guess, where I'm headed a little bit is when all this stuff lands kind of all at once. What did you do? What did you do?
Well, I think I'm blessed right out of the gate from having a fantastic childhood that filled me with confidence and that filled me with strength. And I think that gave me a leg up on where maybe somebody who didn't have those things, if they had to deal with all that stuff in a short period of time, it may have been meltdown time. So I think I had an advantage from that perspective. And then throw in the Linda factor. The strength that she's given me throughout the years has been phenomenal. And again, she just lights up a room when she comes in and just cheers me up by just being there. And so that was a factor as well. I wish I had some specific advice for people in terms of how I dealt with it on a day-to-day basis. I do know, and I kind of realized it when the four of us were talking after a recent podcast, that any conversations I had about it, they were very productive, because there's nothing you can do to bring back a loved one or to erase something really negative happening in your life. A friend of mine is going through the worst possible family tragedy in the world, and we're trying to figure out ways, to support him. There's no way you can do anything except listen to what he has to say and what he wants to say and be there for him. Yeah. And I used to think that was trite. I used to think that was cliche, and then went through that period, and I was like, oh my God, as I'm allowed to talk about it and people just listen, I feel, and I don't know why, but I feel better about it now that I've just sort of put it out there,
right?
And versus just letting it, cram it down. It's like a release of the negative somehow, and I think that's part of what was helpful for sure. And the more I do it, and it gets trickier, because in the moment, in the very chronic moment of the sadness or maybe a tragedy or whatever it is, people are there for you. Say in my dad's case, for a month or two, sorry to hear about that, and they'll listen, and then they move on.
Right.
But I haven't moved on.
Right.
Hell,
you're just starting to cope or deal with it.
Yeah. And I'm not even sure I'm fully there yet. We've had conversations, the four of us as well, about what exactly does it mean to be over something? Everyone, I watched Field of Dreams. That's why it came up earlier. Yeah. I watched Field of Dreams, sat down. It's one of those movies, right? You flicking around, whether it's Shawshank Redemption or Goodfellas or Field of Dreams.
There's some anchor movies, right? Like
Star Wars.
You're not flicking away. You're staying right to the end. I'm right to the end, watching him have a catch with a dad. I was blubbering it was way out of line with where I should be blubbering at that stage. Like actual tragedies that I've dealt with that were awful. I didn't cry in the moment, but here I am crying because Kevin Costner's having a catch with his dad. So that tells me that there's still unresolved things going on in there. So, I can't sit here and, be a guest on this show and say that I've got any level of answers. I'm muddling through like anybody else.
Yeah. Well, I love it, because I think tragedy this past week was the 15th year anniversary of my dad passing after a 2-year battle with lung cancer. He was 66, really young. So I can appreciate that. And when he passed, when we talk about, there was a number of things going on for you. It was the same for me back then, which led to a complete reinvention of myself. But did I know how to move through it at the time? I didn't. And I did the best. I muddled through the best I could. But what I've come to realize and recognize is when we have the opportunity, when it makes sense to, in a safe environment, to talk about some of this, right. It moves through us. Often I think it gets stuck. And I think, we also, and this is a separate thought I want to come back to, because one of the other things we talked about after a recent episode was how I remember you saying, like, but for guys, like, we don't talk about this stuff. And as a matter of fact, to talk about it, right, is like almost like it's shamed, right? And so I do want to visit that with you, but I think how we move through it determines how it moves through us. And when we're willing in the right moment to let grief, let pain show up, and it may sometimes show up and we're watching a movie and all of a sudden we're going, wait a second, my reaction is out of sync with what's really happening right now, but this is good. This is good. I'm just going to let this move through me. I think that's part of the journey. And like 15 years later, am I over my dad? Yeah. I don't know. I don't know. I don't think so. But I'm like, as grief shows up, I think it's just allowing it to show up. But talk to me perhaps about this whole notion of, but it's for most guys, especially, and you grew up, you talked about growing up in a sports type environment. I don't know if you're comfortable talking about this, but like, not okay to talk about pain, weakness, or anything of that nature. Tremendous fear attached to it.
Yeah, and it shouldn't be at this stage in my life. I should be in a mode of, I don't care anymore. But there's that, we talked about the foundation, and it was 90% positive, and so that's been a good thing. But there's also that sports mentality of, whether it's a physical injury in the moment, rub some dirt on it, get back in there.
Sure, it's just a flesh wound.
Yeah, exactly. And then you start talking about your feelings. I won't use the expression I used with you off the air. It's probably
that
not
was in private. Yeah,
that was in private, but it was basically something along the lines
we'll
of.
include it in the show now.
Excellent. But it's basically, what are you, soft?
Yeah.
That kind of thing, but way more graphic than that. And so that stays with you. If you get that driven into you year after year in a all male locker room coming up in the late 70s and through the 80s, I mean, that's a different time. And it would all be unheard of now, of course, but in your formative years, if that's the mentality that all your peers have and coaches are driving it home, I'm glad that I was, able to talk about it the way I have been, because it is a challenge, because there is that voice that's saying, what, are you, soft? And you have to fight that a little bit. And I've been blessed that, and part of the, just to continue on with that sort of thread, it's finding the right person to talk to.
Yeah.
Because if you grab somebody that's, really just maybe a drinking buddy that's sort of a fringe friend or whatever, it's not this. It's got to be someone who just genuinely cares about you and has their ears wide open for you. And in my case, it was my wife Linda. It was a buddy of mine, Mike, who is the same guy who is going through the tragedy right now. So it's been an interesting shift, but yeah, it's absolutely been wonderful that I've got those people in my life that I can kind of give the Heisman to that old school thinking and say, get out of here, and then have these conversations that have, I think, been really, really healthy in recovering from this.
And it's something I know that for sure that this has been the comment we received more than any around Living Richly, is just the fact that it's, in 3 guys, now 4 guys in this episode.
Well, it's always 4 guys.
Well, always 4 guys.
Over there somewhere.
Yeah, that's right.
Hiding in the corner saying, don't ask me, other than, hey.
But now this is fantastic, because I think it's really great for our audience. Like, you're the guy that often is, hey, right, Steve? And we hear, yo, in the background, and now
still drinking bourbon. Wherever I am.
The emotion piece is, it's not common. And it still is not common. And it goes back. It's certainly, as you mentioned, all through your life and the hockey culture. Hell, I've seen people though. Now again, Twitter is Twitter, right? And you get people, the keyboard warrior, but you do have people, they'll even make comments like, oh, my grandfather was in World War I, and they weren't talking about having a mental health day or whatever, right? Like,
and no, just fine.
Yeah, exactly.
No,
right.
just suffering in silence. But
exactly.
they didn't talk about it.
It's so ridiculous that we have put this pressure primarily on men, boys. It starts as certainly as they hit their teen years, to be afraid to be able to be open with the people that matter most to them.
Well, to not only be afraid that it's not normal, it's not okay, it's not acceptable to talk about real shit, to talk about real pain, honestly, to talk about how one is feeling in the moment. I think women do this way better than we do, where they do talk, like amongst friends. They do share more openly about their challenges and their struggles and what they're feeling. And we as men get together and we just shoot shit, right? We shoot the shit, and we don't talk. We connect, but we connect often at a very superficial level. And underneath, there's all this pain and frustration and anger and fear. And we're not allowed to, we don't allow that to even be given expression. And so where does it go? It just goes underground. and it becomes something else.
And the senses of feelings aren't manly.
Right.
And I think that goes to the crux of it, that, you know, you share your feelings outwardly with other men, then, you know, there's this thought that that's just not the way it's done.
Yeah.
And you see some guys that are just cut off from, you know, their partners. They're, you know, I don't want to say cold, but a little cut off from their kids, from where they could be. And, you know, as someone who's come through that lifestyle, coming through that whole jock in the locker room thing, it's a gravely unhealthy thing to just shut down from all of that stuff. You might think, you know, it's like, yeah, I'm being the man, I'm being the rock jawed dude. Well, no.
That has a shelf life, doesn't it? Like it's when we're younger. I remember when I was younger, I was able to sustain that. I was able to maintain that public image. And it wasn't until I couldn't anymore. Right. Well, all of a sudden the energy required to pull that off was no longer available to me, right, that it felt like the bottom was coming out. And now I'm desperately grasping, like, what the fuck? Like, like something's happening and I don't know what's going on. I don't like it, but there's this.
And how much lighter did you feel when it did finally come out? Lighter,
felt,
right?
You felt lighter. You feel free. You feel all of a sudden, oh, wait a second, that this is actually this is not only healthy, this is actually normal. What I had been doing is some twisted sort of approach to life that is so toxic, because again, if it doesn't move through you, it stays in you. And I think for guys, I think this is why we have such, in many ways, it may be an overly simplistic way to look at it, but I think this is why we have such a complex relationship with anger, because I think all that stuff ferments inside of us and it shows up in many ways.
It has to get out at some point.
Right.
And so it explodes.
Enter the midlife crisis.
Right.
For so many. Yeah. And it's not about, there's nothing magic about midlife. It's about how long can you hold all this stuff. Right? Stress is about time under tension. Yeah. So it could be stuff from a long time ago, but we're still holding it. We don't know what to do with it. And we're not given strategies other than don't look at it, put it away, don't talk about it, right? Leave it alone. All of these things are our messages in terms of our strategies about what to do with it. And then we get to a point where we're like, what the hell? Like, why do I feel like crap all the time? They told me to hold this stuff. You'll be good. And really, I think it's like, hold this stuff because we don't want to look at it and we feel uncomfortable about talking about it, right? It's actually not about the person who's experiencing it. It's the people who are around them. So trying to find people who will sit with you and just listen. And that's when you realize, damn, that's not trite. That's profound. To have a person who will just be with you in your moment of hurt or pain or suffering or whatever, and just be with you. You don't have to solve anything.
Yeah. And who knows how it all manifests itself if you do keep it in. Mm-hmm. Like you think about, okay, so whether I'm cut off from my kids or my wife's not very happy, or I'm not very happy, I'm feeling miserable all the time, to something gravely awful, to something even like domestic assault. Who knows if some of those cases aren't basically long-term triggers from keeping garbage like that in your system. I'm not trying to excuse it or talk it away, obviously, but who knows what, you know, where things go if you don't deal with all that stuff.
Well, I would say absolutely you can trace some of those situations to unresolved childhood and not just childhood, but unresolved grief that is translated into anger that you don't know how to express.
What's the old saying? Hurt people hurt people. Right. And so when we don't move, again, if the hurt and the pain and whatever it is, the toxicity doesn't move through us, it stays in us. And if we don't figure out a way to deal with it in a healthier fashion, it's still going to come out, except that usually untouched, unprocessed, it's usually going to come out sideways in unhealthy ways. And the unhealthy ways have a direct impact on our own well-being. And I speak from experience. Our loved ones often are the ones that also suffer.
Well, absolutely.
In a pretty significant way.
And I so appreciate when we first started having this conversation and said, hey, would you be interested in coming out from behind the camera and being on this side of it?
And you were like, no.
Yeah,
and then we were like, come on. And you're like, fuck you.
We're like, come on. We'll fire you if you don't. Oh, okay.
All right.
You're like, I quit. And we're like, no, don't go. Like, it was very complicated.
It was very complicated conversation.
Part of what you said, part of what you said at the time was this. You kind of said, "Well, I'm not there yet. Like, I'm still kind of figuring this stuff out." And I think we were all like, "Me too."
Yes.
Right. But I do fear sometimes that, for our listeners, they listen to the three of us, they see the way we engage. Listen, there are times where we're pissed off at each other. There are times when I'm pissed off at you.
Okay,
I can see that. I can see that.
That's fair. I can see that. The way we review, I totally
It
see
took
that.
them 25 minutes on an episode to join you guys and piling it down.
No, I was on your side. I said I can see you. Oh man,
Rob, you just keep pushing people away.
I'm with you guys.
That feels a little bit like a victim mentality there. I don't know.
From our side of the table, Rob.
There are days when I am absolutely not living richly.
Oh, come on.
There are days we are working this shit out in the moment, right? And that's the beauty of what I love about having Steve on the episode. And we certainly want to have this is about people, not just guys. It's 4 guys here, and like I said, we're going to have some females that we're going to want to hear their stories. This is about people on a journey of figuring this out. And the reason we launched this podcast in the beginning was because we recognized that we were on to something that other people would value and benefit from.
Yeah. That they're also on.
They're also onto.
Right.
Thank you. Yeah.
One question I have for you. I mean, already what you have said today, people listening, watching this podcast, they're going to be inspired by, because you have just given them permission to perhaps have for maybe the first time, or perhaps in a different level, to open up about some stuff that perhaps they've been afraid to open up to. So if that's the only thing people hear today, that can be transformative. But I'm curious about this one. Okay. And you can answer this or tell me to fuck off. Okay.
Please tell him to fuck off. Then answer it.
Just tell me to fuck off anyway. But here we were. I remember early stage, right? The first couple times we got together, we barely know each other. Hit it off right away. There was a genuine, we can really connect. And most of the conversation after a day of recording, we usually come together and record 4 to 5 episodes a day. And so we're spending a whole day together. And in the early days, it was more like, so Steve, what's some advice you have from a podcast perspective on how you've provided such great guidance.
God, yeah.
But
we're sorry about those early episodes.
Yeah, they're right.
We're learning.
Folks, they're only going to get better, we hope. Okay. But I still remember the day you made a comment at the end of a day full of, and you said the following words, and I'm curious what was behind that for you. This is like getting, I think, free therapy is to that. Do you remember that, making that comment? You said, this is like getting free therapy. I'm curious, you coming here, this could have just been a job. We've talked about there's been a connection. What was that kind of moment for you where you went, there's more to this perhaps than I realized, even signing up to provide the services?
Well, it's a like-mindedness. It's you guys are the same age as me. You've had a lot of the same experiences. If you ever have conversations with, say, your kids about, my kids are in their 20s, and there's already, you see the generation gap.
Right? Yeah. Right. They look at you like you're ancient, right?
No, it's just references that I'm 100% sure are cool, but they're just not.
No, we're going to need to stop with the love boat references.
Dad, stop talking. Stop talking.
Yeah, no, so it's been, as much off the air as on, but hearing the conversation from guys your age that are talking the way you guys do, it's refreshing. It's an epiphany. It's whatever word you want to throw in there. It's just most of the guys that I hang out with, I love dearly, but at the same time, we talk sports. If we get into how are you, it's a very, very surface look at how we are, and then back to sports or whatever. So it was probably came along at a good time. To hear people talking about this, men talking this way, because you just don't hear it very often. Whether it's a fear, talk that way, or just I don't know, it just across the board, it was just something new, something different. And it wasn't one specific thing, but I would say that as good as the stuff is on the show, it was the conversation, because obviously I was able to engage with you and talk about some of the stuff we just talked about in that episode that resonated with me, and to have an opportunity to immediately get feedback. Everybody listening right now who's already a fan of the podcast would probably like to do what I do, and that's, okay, here's my situation as it applies to that episode.
Right.
So that's been fun. There's been, the Star Wars episode, for example. I'm not really the biggest Star Wars fan, but all the other ones, all day long, they were all great. So
except for that one.
Yeah. So get me a helmet, and maybe I'll get in it. So there wasn't a particular moment, but
it was
just
an evolution.
Exactly. Just it's something unusual, and I've really enjoyed it, and I look forward to more.
Yeah. Right on. We're glad you're here. We're glad you're here.
That even that makes me uncomfortable.
Yeah,
that's the world I come from, and that it's like, ooh, he's happy that I'm here. I'm not sure how I feel about that. Right. How about this, Steve? Just say thank you. I'm glad to be here. Geez. That kind of thing. It's not really that hard, but it's just.
I remember how long it took me. And it was, I think, even a conversation with Sherry, might have started to work on this before, but how long it took me to be able to, when somebody would come up to me and say, man, I really enjoyed what you had to say, and I would, again, for so long, all through the preaching days, it was, and I'd kind of pass on something else, to just be able to say, thank you. Oh, thank you. That I'm glad that it spoke to you.
Yeah, you've talked about
hand on the heart, very quick. Thanks, I appreciate that. Yeah. No one ever notices, right. But it's just like, hey, thanks, I appreciate that.
Yeah. Can we try it again?
Yeah. Well, we're really glad that you're here with us.
Thank you. That is good.
It's all right. It's not like Sherry.
Okay,
it's
pretty good.
Thank you,
Pretty good. We'll get Sherry on the show. She's amazing. Yeah.
Amazing. So you look back and you kind of, as you think through some of this, it's probably a bit of a weird question, recognizing some of the challenges. Maybe let's talk about those the few years, the firing, the passing of your dad, COVID, all of that. What are you grateful for during that time?
All the good things. There's so many good things, and that's what I celebrate all the time. I have a daughter, Lindsay. She's about to go to teachers college in the fall. I've got Michael, who inspires me every day to fight through this autistic haze that he's been given in this world and still have this neat personality with a great sense of humor. He's challenging, but he's an amazing kid. My wife's just tremendous. I'm thankful for so many great things. We have this wonderful house, 140-year-old house outside of Manitou, this great old stone building. I hear Trevor talking about this place where we are right now, and his love of this, and I feel it. We have 20 years in Barhaven, and we were like, no room at all. And then all of a sudden we move out and we have 3 acres of land. Don't know what I'm going to do with it all other than cut it every 2 weeks. But it's a lot.
Do you want some sheep?
Yeah.
They can keep it. They can keep it pretty relatively.
Yeah, I'll grab a llama on the way out.
There's some lambs for sale.
Yeah, and I'm just I'm thankful for all the positives and friends and the sports. I can't think of. You guys always talk about finding that thing, that one thing that you always talk about, and I think about some of the sports I play. Like I still play hockey and I still play golf, and I know that it seems like a small thing and big deal, but that's what life's about, finding the thing that revs you up and showing up on the first tee, even though I'm a terrible golfer, showing up on the first tee with friends, cold beers, and it just, that scratches my itch. And so throughout all those things, I still had so many blessings in my life, Rob. So it would take a lot more than those things to unravel me, thankfully. But those are the things that kind of kept me going.
When you look back, what was missing? Like when you look back with kind of the a little more experience, a little more insight, a little more time, a little more wisdom, maybe about, I wish I'd had this, that would have really helped or moved things forward or stabilized things? Like what would you have liked to have
in a big picture way, or during the years that we're talking about, like during your life?
Yeah, I was thinking like particularly during those years when like all this landed.
Yeah. Wow. What would I like in there?
What would have helped that maybe was missing?
Well, I think that the things we've talked about, just having more access to people, and I had people that were really inquisitive and really cared. I think that's what everybody struggles with a little bit, in that in those early days, maybe even the first couple of months after something big happens, people are there for you, but they've got their own lives. Like you guys have talked about on the show, everybody's flailing. Everybody's got their struggles. They can only be there for X amount of support. It's only the real special people in your life that you can really lean on in times like that. And I'm not saying this to, suggest anybody in my life, didn't help enough or anything like that. It's just the way it is.
Yeah.
But it would have been nice to probably, and part of it's on me too, and that I was kind of probably more focused within and all the things I was dealing with at that stage. But it would have been nice if I could do over again to, seek people out and say, I would like to go out with you. And actually, if you don't mind, I know it's been 3-4 months since this happened, but it'd be nice to have an opportunity to talk about it with you in particular. And there's probably only about 10 people in my life that I would think that way about. But that would be probably the thing that would be missing most, in that, it would have been nice to hear a little bit more from people. But more than that, I should have been more proactive, particularly knowing, after all the conversations we've had, particularly knowing how much talking about things helps.
Yeah. It's powerful.
Is it ever powerful? And it's this notion of, again, and we talk about it all the time here on the podcast, living your best life starts with you.
Yeah.
It's within your control. It's the thing. And I so appreciate what you said there about, I would have liked to have maybe reached out to some people, and it's within our control. How they respond, we can't really say until we reach out.
But we have control.
But we have control over sharing and expressing our needs to the people that are closest to us. And I have no doubt that those that are closest to us, yes, they may, in the case of you have a couple guys that are close to that, they haven't really been equipped. I don't know how to share my own feelings, and now you want me to listen to you share your feelings. But most would, in a genuine way, if they care about us, would say, I'm ready to at least listen, and I don't know how well I'll do with that. Certainly our partners can be very valuable, and I love what you've said about your own and being able to,
when you have the right partner,
when you've got the right partner, to be able to have that as well. But it really does start with us expressing, and I'll tell you this, I know you were worried about coming on and what this would look like, and like this. Fuck.
Yeah, that's awesome.
This I think we just took the podcast to another level.
This might almost rival the Star Wars episode.
This might be the second best episode of all of the episodes, only because there's such a sense we are not talking about something that's out there that is not real life. This is about taking now these principles and applying to the real challenges that we face each and every day. And so thank you. Thank you for being a part of this, for being willing. I know this is a big step. I can't wait till we blast this out over all the social media and thousands and thousands and thousands of people get to hear this.
I see the ulterior motive.
No, I really do appreciate that you took the time. You were willing to open up. I know this wasn't easy, but yet here you were willing to be a part of this. This is what this journey is about. It's a community of people trying to grow together. So thank you so much for being a part of this.
Thank you, boys. This was nice. Real nice. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hey, so again, thank you so much for tuning in to our episode. One of the things I want to encourage you to do is if this spoke to you, again, I would encourage you to leave a comment. Would love it if you would like and subscribe to the channel. But certainly, let's hear a little bit of your story. Maybe there are parts of Steve's story that have connected to you. We'd love to hear about those as well. And of course, we'll pass those comments along to Steve. You can also, again, the easiest way to follow him is on Twitter at TSN Steve, and I know that he'd welcome your comments there as well.
And share it out. I'm sure those of you that are listening know a man who might need to hear this, who perhaps is struggling to open up and share their pain, and I believe this is the central message of today's episode is how we move through something determines how it moves through us. And again, thank you for your candor, your openness, Steve. Share the episode out. There's people that need to hear this, and I don't feel probably as strongly about this as like for any other episode. We always encourage you to share, but if there's an episode to share, this would be it.
I'll be putting all of the things that Steve has said offline in the show notes.
Yeah, right, exactly. The actual quotes.
That's right. You can always visit our show notes at livingrichly.me/act, and any of the resources that we put, we'll put there as well,
including all links to his social media profiles.
All of that'll be there. Steve, let me also say, anytime you want to talk about anything you've been through, I know you got 3 more guys here who are 100% there for you, and you never have to wonder if we're okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Nice.
See,
That's good. That's good.
I'd also say if there's any listeners who, if you feel like you're stuck and you got nobody, fire us a note.
Yeah.
Like listen, we can't solve your problems for you. That's not what we need to do with each other. But you're not alone, and so we want to make sure that we just reinforce that as well.
Steve, when you the very first time you talked about, you described or defined a podcast as basically internet radio. So normally this is the Living Richly podcast, but today it's the new version of Tigor. It's True Guys on the radio.
Oh, that's good.
That was good. Yeah?
That's good.
Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you join us for the next episode. Be well.